Alright, mastering Solidworks, chapter 32, working with surfaces. With surface modeling, you build a shape by face by face. The face is made with the face of surface features that can be knit together to enclose a volume which could become a solid. With a solid modeling, you build many of the faces one single feature to make the volume, and the fact that solid modeling is really just highly automated surface modeling. Obviously, that more detail in that. But the definition will get you started. You can drive a car without knowing how the engine works, but you can get the most power possible out of the car by only pressing harder on the gas pedal. If you have to get under the hood, make adjustments to understand how it works. In a way, that is what working with surfaces really is about. Getting under the hood and tinkering with the underlying functionality. The goal of most surfacing models is to finish with a solid. Some of the surface features that makes face of what will become face of the solid. Some of the features only act as reference geometry. Surface modeling is inherently multi-body modeling because most surface features don't merge bodies automatically. In this chapter, you will learn to understand surfacing functions, learning surfacing terminology, explore surface tools, applying surface techniques. Introducing surfaces. In the end, you may never really need surfaces. You can perform workarounds using solids to do most of the things you need to do. However, many of these workarounds are inefficient with a cumbersome, raise many difficulties as they solve. Though you may not view some of the typical things that you now do inefficient or cumbersome, after some of the alternatives you may change your mind. The goal of the chapter is to introduce surface functions to those of you who don't typically use surfaces. I'm not showing you how the surfaces are used in context of creating complex shapes, just how you can use them in the various general 3D modeling tasks. The word surfacing often has been used to confuse in significant complex shapes. Not all surface work is done to create complex shapes, and many complex shapes can be made directly from solids. Many users think it because they don't have complex shapes they never need to. Use surface feature of the chapter shows many of the examples of the don't require complex shapes. In this situation with the first surfaces, make it easier, more efficient, simply possible to do the necessary tasks. Although some of the uses of the surfaces may be immediately obvious, by the end of this chapter you should have enough information application that you can start experimenting and increase the confidence surface techniques. Many surface techniques have sort of the equivalent in analog solid modeling world, but not all. When the analog does exist, I'll share it to help you understand the function of the specifying surface tools. Understanding surface technology. The deal with the surface, you may hear with a different terminology. The terminology typically with a solid modeling. Special terminology also often exists with the surface because of the important conceptual differences between how solids and surfaces are handled. These terms are fairly universally among all surfacing software. Underlying surface solid construction concepts generally uniform between major solids and surface modeling packages. What varies the software to software is how the user interacts with geometry through the surface software interface. You never see some of these terms in SolidWorks menus and help files, training books, elsewhere, but use the software, you'll see why the concepts are relevant. Alright, and it shows two items being knit together. Icon on the left. Knit function is an analogous solid feature combining and joins multiple surfaces bodies in a single surface body. Unlike combined, knit doesn't perform subtract intersection bowling operations. It is an option to create solid and resulting surface body meets the requirements of full enclosed volume without gaps or overlaps. However, unlike solid bodies can combine, which move the overlap, volumetric surface bodies must use only intersecting edges, more like sketch etnies that can be only touched end to end. Knit is also sometimes used in the same way, with the zero distance offset is used in a copy set of the solid faces to become a new surface body. You can find a nice option that enables you to quickly see the boundaries of the surface body live with the choose the tools option, display selection, show open edges surface in a different color by default. With the color medium blue, you can change it by choosing tools option color surface with open edges. And then it shows trimming the function. The trimming function solid analyzed with solid cut. You can use these sketches, planes, other surface bodies with the trim surface body. The underlying surface is defined by two-dimensional meshes for the reason for the usually four-sided like a woven piece of cloth, but maybe other shapes. When underlying surface is trimmed, the software still remembers the underlying original boundaries but combines with a new boundary, which is typically how the face shapes, especially non-four-sided shapes, are created. When you trim surfaces, you can choose to delete either side of the trim tool. With the mutual with the trim of the both surfaces that can be trimmed, the mutual trim usually leads to the corner created by intersection two surfaces. This shows a square taken out of the surface. Untrim function predictable opposite trim. Remove the boundary from the surface. Untrim restores natural four-sided boundaries that have been changed by being trimmed at adjacent surfaces. Untrim can remove the boundary selected with one edge at a time, interior edges only, and so on. Or remove all the edges at once. Untrim even works imported geometry as described in tutorial chapter 31 modeling multi-bodies. Figure 32 1 shows how the untrim works. Untrimming surface created Solidworks by lofting surface trim by sketch trimmed away portion of the transparent trim surface with untrim applied to its surface. Untrim work for the native and imported geometry isn't truly like history of the import of the geometry, but it does help uncover the underlying original shape of the faces. Hybrid modeling. The term hybrid modeling can be taken along different connotations. You can have the mix between solid surfaces with the surface observation, history, and the direct. So be careful when you determine the different things for the different people. In this case, you're using it mean with a combination of solids and surface modeling. Surface modeling tends to be slower than the solid modeling because you model each face individually with a manually trim and a knit. Cutting a hole in the surface model, it much more with the involved with cutting a hole in the solid. And to cut a hole in the surface model, you can first trim the hole on the one side and then the other side, then make the cylindrical face of the hole, then knit together new and old faces as a singular enclosed volume solid modeling, and essentially a highly automated surface modeling. However, any software user knows automation almost always comes to expensive flexibility with the situations. No different. Surface modeling puts compromised power back into your hands, and that's really why we take the time to learn it. Solid modeling strengthens some of the predisposed with the type of the part with the square ends of the flat bottom because of the solid, creating all solids for the object ones, capping off the solid feature with the dome shape is difficult. For example, they think about an extrusion regardless of the shape of the sketch. If you have two flat ends, even the loft sweeps typically end up with one or two flat ends. Because section change with the often planar surface enables you to create one side at a time. Another way of looking at the using surface requires you to build its section. Sometimes you'll find that even pessimistic modeling surface functions are extremely useful. I don't propose to divide and then purpose surface modeling just for benefit for the few of the advantages. But I do recommend considering the surface techniques to help you define the solids with an appropriate hybrid approach and sensible open a whole new world of capabilities. I've heard people say that after taking a Solidworks surfacing class, they would never look at CAD geometry in the same way again. Alright, understanding non-uniform rational B-spline. Non-uniform rational B-spline is the technology most modern mechanical design modelers use to create 3D geometry. Or national uniform rational B-spline surfaces are defined with the curves called isoparameter lines. Perpendicular directions refer to U and V directions, which form two-direction cloth-like mesh. In fact, with the perpendicular directions, you the means for the surface have the tendency to be four-sided. Of course, exceptions exist for the three-sided, even two-sided with the patches. Given the geometry of this kind referred to as degenerate because one or more of the sides has been reduced to zero length, degenerating the geometry, but not always the surface geology and geometrical area of the Solidworks and other CAD packages. Figure 32 show the surface with the mesh displayed on them. You can create the mesh with face curve sketch tool. Alright, figure 32 shows mesh created with the face curve sketch tool. Degeneration point. Using developable surfaces and flatten without stretching. They also surfaces you can easily in one or both directions include planar, cylindrical, conical shapes. It is coincident that these types of shapes have been flattened by sheet metal tools. Using ruled surfaces. Develop surfaces with a special type of the broader range of surfaces called ruled surfaces. Solidworks special tool of the creation ruled surfaces is described in detail with the next section. Ruled surfaces define surfaces with a straight line that can be drawn at every point. Corollary to this of the ruled surfaces may be the curvature in only one direction. Ruled surfaces are far less limited to the developed surfaces, but they are flattened easily. Ruled surfaces are usually frequent in plastic molded design when the draft and the parting surface of 3D part lines are needed. Define Gaussian curve. Gaussian curve is not referred directly with the SolidWorks software, but you may hear the term used in general and CAD engineering discussions. It can be defined simply with a curve in two directions. Result of sphere would be a Gaussian curvature, but a cylinder would not. Surfacing tools. Surface feature for the equivalent available to the most solid feature for the extrude, revolve, sweep, loft, fill, and so on. Some of the solid features does not have. Some of the solid features don't have the equivalent, such as the hole with their shell with the others. Some surface functions don't have solid equivalents, such as trim, untrim, extend, thicken, offset, radiate, ruled, or filled. And that shows a surface with an arrow line in it using extrude surface feature that works exactly like the extrude style concept of the ends of the surface arrow cap that includes all same X and conditions, draft curve, towards Lex and sketch rules, so on. And already familiar with 32.3, which is property manager for extruded surfaces. Surface extruded from direction, distance, loft, direction, select the contours. And create extruded surfaces from open with a closed sketch for the open, probably beginning with the most popular type with the two non-parallel lines joined end to end. Same sketch for the resulting extruded sketch for the single surface plotting. This is made with the two face with a hard edge between them. If the sketch line with a disjoint with the extrude with the result with a disjoint with the surface models. If the sketch line with the word again to be made with the end to end, but done with a separate sketch for the result of the surface bodies, which be separate bodies, and the second body would not automatically knit to the first one if it happens with the way of the solid first merge. This is an important quality of surface to keep in mind. If you create a surface different feature for the one of them knitted into a single body, but then you'd have to do that manually. If you have a split in line on a surface, you can select the surface extended with extruded. For surface command, you will then need to select the plane axis to define with the extrusion direction. Specify the depth of the extrusion. Figure 32.4 show the property manager result of the function. Alright, surface direction. Plane, distance, loft, cap end, direction, delete original faces instead of net result. Technique special because of the additional option cap end, delete original face of the net result. It would be nice for the function to exist with the regular sketch made with extrude with the other surfaces as well. Find similar functions, surface extrude with the ability to extrude with the 3D sketch. You can use the regular solid extrude with the extrude with the 3D sketch. It will cap the ends for you. I find that all extruded options interesting have yet to be found with the application for them. The ability to extrude 3D surfaces duplicates rules although additional options must be selected manually. Using boundary surface shows the surface over top of a shape or solid. Boundary surface feature was created with a highly qualified replacement loft feature with a certain limitation. Loft that has not been removed with the feature lift. The boundary surface feature must be resembled to the loft with the elements of the sweep, fill, and loft. Also does a few things boundary cannot, such as closed loop without direction 2 curve, and must importantly a center loft. The boundary surface can also use sketch curve with the edges in several arrangements, such that the curves are arranged in X, F, E, T, L, and other shapes. Figures 3.2.5 show some of these shapes. If every edge and sketch segment is combined with the curve of the direction, you must have the selection manager for the edge segment of the group. The selection manager enables you to select portion of a single sketch with the combined elements such edge and curve into the single selection on the profile grid. Curve of the boundary and loft feature for the interface of the boundary surface is shown in figure 32.6. Shows boundary surface direction. Direction 1 curves influence is none. Direction 2 curves influence none. Degrees. Options, merge, tangent, faces, trim, direction 1, trim, direction 2, drag, stretch, show, preview, curvature, display. Main advantage of the boundary surface over loft. The boundary surface can apply with a curved boundary condition and the way around the loft cannot apply curvature continually across the guided curves. Default to boundary surface when possible. Boundary solid features are also available. Alright, same thing as the surface over top of the block. Offset surface feature closed with the relative of the thickened fixture sketch and offset may also fail in some same over the fail for the same reason. For example, if you offset a 1/4 inch radius by 3/10 of an inch to the inside, it will fail because it cannot be offset past the 0 radius. And same true that the offsetting surface complex surface does not have the actual constant curvature, the more like a spline having constantly changing curvature. If the offset is scaling to the direction of the decreasing radius, made more minimum radius of the face is being offset with an offset feature, surface feature will fail. One of the ways troubleshooting failing offset surface is you check with the tool, check with the minimum radius. Remember the area of the minimum radius is probably only curvature in the same direction. Offset with the same radius will increase when the offset with the small radius isn't a problem. The problem comes from the other direction where you are offsetting inside of the small radius. Unlike sketch int function with the shown figure 31, you can offset with the surface by 0 the distance usually done with a copy each of the solid surface for this to make with a new surface by with a 0 distance offset with the knit with sometimes interchangeable, although the knit causes the problems with if you're selecting the surface by then composed with a single face. And it assumes that you're trying to knit one body to another. The default select with the body then fails with the message that you cannot knit the body itself because knit it has limitation offset doesn't. I prefer to offset the tool with a copying fifth to make the new surface body. You can also note is that when you enter the 0 with the offset with the distance with the offset property manager name changes automatically with the copy surface the knit does two function with the sketch offset but it does not with the one of them an option with the create with the solid with the knit from the knit body the form of the closed body. Second option is somewhat more obscure with the offering with the ability to select all face with the one side with the radiated surface. Let's discuss the option more depth later in this chapter using knit surface sections. We're talking about copying surface bodies. You must also give the move the copies of the body feature of the chapter 31. You may simply copy the body without using it, without also moving the features issue of the warning. Ask you whether you really intended the body without moving it. This is annoying but pointless message. Also, moving the copy of the bodies feature does not enable you to copy only the part of the body select faces or merge multiple bodies into one like the offset feature, set surface feature. All things considered, I recommend 0 distance surface offset feature for the copy of the parts and bodies, part of bodies, unless the goal is immediately to make solid out of it. In which case, you should use the knit feature when using a radiated surface, typically a molded building application. And that shows an egg with like a ring around it. Using radiated surfaces, radiated surface features isn't one of the most commonly used surface features. It has been largely superseded by rules surfaces because of the rule surfaces that have the same part of the radiated surface that does the same sort of thing a radiated surface does or more radiated work from the edge of the section of the reference plane in the distance. Newly created surfaces and perpendicular with the selected edge parallel to the selected plane, so the distance wide, and is probably most commonly used with creating models. Other knit shapes tools such as dies, stamping, forges, blanks, thermal forming, and so on. 32.7 show the property manager selection of the creating a radiated surface. The one application where the radiated surface had very interesting usage when you combine with the knit function. 32.8 show the surrounding with the radiated surface going with the wireframe in which the knit feature is being used to select all the aces at one side with the radiated surface. Second smaller selection back with the property manager that contains face 1 is called seed face causes the knit automatically selected all the faces on the same side of the model as the selected seed face. The requirement here is that radiated goes completely around the model, separates the faces into the faces in one side of the radiated and the faces on the other side radiate. You can use the radiated with the seed face selection. It's extremely useful for the mold creation. Alright, you have radiated surface to edge, radiated direction reference, show the radiated parameter direction, your parts, propagated tangent facing the distance as radiated surface knit, surface selection, face, create solid emergent, needs gap control. Or using knit surface functional with the discussed previously understanding surface terminology section as well with the use of the radiated surface section. The knit operation result with the water type volume with the tried its form solid option turns volume into solid can also make the solid for the surfacing of the three or other function. The fill surface feature for the option with the merge to fill with the solid with the knit into the surface body with the knit surface body with the enclosed. This gives you the option to make solid with a very nice and complete interface design option. Save the many steps of the fill surface feature for the described in more detail later in this chapter. Creating a solid is available only when the knit surface and fill surface when using knit surface and fill surface. Whenever you want a surface to become a solid build body. Using fill or knits for the create solid highlights but remains inactive. The surface that merge together create a closed volume, create solid only highlights and check with the merge results. Gap control panel showing figure 32.9 show the gap between the edge of the surface and it enables you with the gaps in a certain range, force the gaps less than the specified tolerance value called knitting tolerance or knit. Top head down knit and show the surfaces. Create solid emergent needs gap knitting tolerance show gaps in range. And With all powerful tools, possibility, misuse of the tools of the exist, the ability to play with the tolerance, double-edged sword. On the other hand, gives you the ability to force surfaces to knit that may otherwise not knit at all, making the model tolerate larger gaps, defining solids, knitting surfaces. Solidworks may force together surface edges that have the problems that have been solved in other ways, removing the remodeling gap. Tolerances can cover the problem during the important operation of the other software that doesn't have the capability to adjust the tolerance. There should be definite with the gap control options, but also aware of the potential problems you might see with data downstream. Alright, shows a downward arrow on a surface in the blue. Thickening surface, the other function of creating a solid with the surface of the thickening features surface body and clothed volume selective. Then the option created circle and closed volume appears on the thickening property shown for figure 3210. You can also thicken the feature choosing insert boss base thicken from the menus. Thickening parameters, thickness, diameter, dimension, create solid from the closed volume merge result. And then it shows a planar face can create it quickly using a many of the situation, just surfacing the work. And because of the definition, planar can use the sketch on the other purpose that you make the plane with the mirroring and the cutting dimension. However, the more commonly planar surface created with a closed sketch, that's with a rectangle. Create a multiple planar sketch as one surface that does not need to be all the same plane, even parallel. Commonly done to you close the hole of the surface model so at the bottom of the cylindrical bosses of the plastic part using linear circular edge. A good example of this bike frame part with the name bike frame solid part chapter 32. Download materials from Wiley website. Remember the planar surface of the chapter 31 split feature of the split of the leg with the important part with the most effective of the sketch of the plane because of the split was limited to the bounds of planar surface not infinite like the sketch for a plane. Planar surface does not knit within itself with the rest of the surface provided around it automatically. You must use the knit feature to do this. And then shows the surface being extended to the extended with an arrow. Extend surface feature function is much way the same way the extend function works and extended function works. However, the spline base on the surfaces are more difficult to extend when the surface end. Even the figure 2111 3211 shows property manager interface example of the feature of the work. Only item that requires the explanation extension time panel with the same surface option maybe means extended surface will be simply extrapolated in selected direction. Planar surface easy if it extend because this goes in definitely without running into the problem. Cylindrical surface can be extended only into it runs into itself with complex loft and the swift surfaces are often difficult to extend. Extrapolation complex surfaces isn't easy to do and often result in itself with intersecting faces which cause the feature to fail. Alright, show the extend surface the edges face to extend the edge this up point in surface dimension and extension type same surface linear. When the same surface ending works with the creates of the nice result because it does create the edge of the extension begins and the smooth with the extent of the existing surface. Linear option more reliable to serve the same surface the option because of the serve the tangent existing surface keeping the good for the direction working like a rule surface it does not rely on extending the existing surfaces. The option created the edge of starting point with a new geometry. Then shows to the left the trim surface. The trim surface feature of the described briefly earlier with the chapter that warrants more with a complete description here. Surface can be trimmed 3 types of entities, sketches, planes, and other surfaces. When the use of the surface body trim one of the 2 options, the standard mutual trim and the standard option comes with the surface. One surface to act with the trim tool, but the other surface to be trimmed by the tool trim tool. But when selecting a mutual trim option, both surfaces is set with the trim and the tool, with both surfaces are trimmed. Alright, for example, the trim surface is only open to the mouse example of the chapter 31 step of the root of the tree with a show with a couple of the trim type of the trim surface as well with the extended surface of the others. Many people overlook the ability with the trim surface of the plane, which can be very handy. Sometimes plane's infinite, which means that you have less worry about when it comes to changing the edge effectively features rebalanced incorrectly. Finally, ability to trim 2D sketches was well known. By trimming the 3D sketches is less known. 3D sketch tool is called a spline on surface that enables you to draw a spline directly on any surface and open. Options exist for the trim surface, the property management of the trim surface with the type of the sketch, the very useful, the many situations the remember it is available to trim them from prevent sometimes visual confusing when mouse moves over the selection of the surface will be either kept or removed. The portion of the surface will change with the cover. Whether they keep it or remove it depends on the option selected within the property manager keep selection and the remove selection. For example, 3212 shows the portion of the bike frame solid part that would provide with the download material of this chapter. Vertical horizon tubes are being trimmed with a C shape and straight line sketches respectively. The selection portion of the tubes should be kept the keep section selection options, and it shows the top C, the trim type, trim tool, keep removed surface trim, split options, split all natural linear. Then it shows a fill surface feature of the referred to Solidworks interface with documentation, either fill or filled, depending on whether the reference is made. In my opinion, one of the most powerful tools, surface modeler toolbox. Sometimes amazing that the feature can do this. Fill surface feature with its intent with the create with the oddly shaped holes between the solid bodies. You can use the constant curve of the drive of the shape of the fill between the existing boundary. It can even be knit and solid surface boundary together, solid all in one step. Beyond this, you can use the fill directly on solid model with integrate with directly with the solid automatically, much like the replace function described later in this chapter. While the development, it was referred to the inside patches of the rather complex example of fill surface found with the bike frame. Examples of one of these fill the shown figure 3213. Head fill joint to the right, patch boundary, edge section, alternate face tangent, menu, plotted edge alls, optimized surface show, previews, constant curves, constraint curves option, fix up boundary, merge result, create solid reverse direction, curvature display, mesh preview, mesh density, zebra stripes, curvature, combs. First thing you should notice about fill surface is create the overside of the four-sided patch trim to fit with the available size. When using fill surface, you will have to patch completely bounded on other surfaces shown. Think of 3211. Fill surface can work with the boundary ends enclosed, but it works better with a closed boundary. You can set boundary, condition, contact, tangent, curvature. Contact simply means that the faces touch the edge. Tangent means the slopes of the face either side of the edge match all points along the edge. Curvature means curvature continuous. Or C2, where the fill surface matches only tangent, not only tangent, but curvature faces on the other side of the boundary edge. The result of the smoother transition simply tangent. When you select optimize surface option, Solidworks drive with the four-sided patch from the boundary. Note that the part, even the optimization surface option is selected, but clearly be ignored, but because of the boundary six-sided gap that cannot be patched smoothly with a four-sided patch necessary for the improvement of the optimized fill surface even when it works. Constraint curve that can influence the shape of the fill surface example is shown in the figure 3214 screenshot of the mouse example. The control on the shape of the thumb indentation and the construction spline shown on the face of the part were created by intersecting curve tool enabled by spline. Use the constant curve to be made tangent to the surface. So start with the fill, boundary, edge, alternate face, contact, apply, edge, optimize surface, preview, constant preview, constant curve sketches, fix up boundary, merge result, create solid, curvature, mesh preview, mesh density, zebra stripes, curvature, comb. Alright, shows the mid-surface of the feature within intended with the conjunction of the analog to do the create palette and eliminates thin wall structure in the mid-plane of the flow scenario that works on parallel offset feature for the create with the surface midway between the faces. If the face opposite of the drawing symmetrically, surface with the wall is wide with the bottom of the top. Then the top, the mid-surface feature won't be work. It works like a linear wall, cylindrical walls, but not elliptical spline-based shapes. Proper management of the mid-surface shown in figure 3215. Surface face 1, face 2, updated pair, reconditioned threshold, face pairs, positions, options, knit surfaces. Percent of the distance between the face part with adjusted for the default 50% of the possible resulting face can be knit in a single body. Then it shows a surface over the top of the regular shape, solid body, replace face, feature that does not create with a new surface geometry, but it integrates with existing surface geometry into solid. Place a selected face over the solid and surface the body with a selected surface body. Replace face is one of the few features that can add or remove material with a single feature. If you were manually performing the functions that are done in replace face, you would start with deleting several face for the solid, extending face for the trimming the surface bodies by knitting. Finishing knitting all the trim and extend faces back to single solid body. Very powerful, useful tool, although it's sometimes difficult to tell with a situation where the figure 3216 shows the part with the replaced face feature has performed. The surface that either replaced with a flat face with the solid has turned into transparent with the first selection box with the original face to face with the selection. Second selection box is surface of the body with a new face of the tool tips each of the box of the target face for the replacement or replacement surfaces, and which seems a little ambiguous, but I like to think as them as old top, new bottom. replace face, replace parameters chapter, and then the replace face feature chat. Alright, rules serve the discuss the general and stick with the understand, serve the terminology, the discuss the topic with more details, specify the regard for the solid interface of the creating rules, serve the rules, serve this feature for the Solidworks one with these feature may never miss until you see it in action. Extremely useful the construction phase of the drafting, extending phase of the tangent of the direction, making radiated, serve the types of building models, building molds, many of the other applications that can be frustrating and unreliable. Rules serve the require with the model, serve the solid, with the edge, with the which you start with the create, with the rules, serve the sketch and curve, with the icon, not even more become actively until they have serve the geometry and graphics window. Rules serve the type of the tangent, serve the normal, serve the tape, the vacuum, the perpendicular vacuum, sweep, the distance, direction, edge selection, options, trim, knit, and connection service. Figure 32, 17, show the property manager, interface the rules, serve the rules, serve the feature, works with the edge of the solid, serve the type of the feature, have the basic type of the operation can perform, change to the normal, serve the tape, vector, perpendicular vector, sweep, the tangent to serve the seating setting create with the serve of the tangent with the serve of the select with the edge with the alternate face the option would be available with the base shape with the being solid with the face filling with a big elliptical hole that would be with the rules of the tangent with the bottom of the face instead of the side with the normal serve of the setting and the tilt of the 5 degree with the horizontal because of the surface loft of the 5 degree draft angle big end with the make and rules of the normal the tape of the vector setting with the need to plane with existing and planar axis selection established direction and then rules for the create with the reference for the angle with the use set with the combination alternate side of the bottom with the angular arrow direction toggle between toggle button next to the plane section that you can adjust for the current created by the setting interface to make the change, but it isn't exactly clear unless you function often, but does work. Perpendicular to vector setting is better option than the normal surface to normal to surface section where the surface has been created same over the built in the draft angle the setting of the looks most of the radius surface feature although it works much more better than the radius surface. Sweep setting makes a face perpendicular to the surface created with a perpendicular to the vector straight line whipped around the edge. The actual great way to offset an edge 3D sketch you with the edge of the surface the offset of the original. Alright, then shows a use intersection of a body, solid. Intersection feature with the non-strictly surface based solids functions covered in Chapter 31. Primary purpose of several and even the solids and surface based bodies, faces, planes, created new solid bodies from combinations of the one of the best use of the feature of the filling levels of the liquid for a liquid in a container. For example, 3218 show the water can with a solid block of water, then add after intersection feature has implied the volume of the water that was inside of the water in the can. Alright, intersection show the plane, the face, the body, the surface. Selection creating intersection region, create internal region, create bold, planar, opening surfaces, and this is the intersection region to exclude options, add, hid, visible, and then invert selection. Option merge result conform surfaces. If you would try to do the same example to keep the water content intact with it would be more channel that might require the different setting with the invert selection of the preview option for the variable at the top of the region, the in list for the in and out left for the creating internal region, the option for the intersect feature for the not easy to function. Mainly because of the resistive of the toughly visualized selected there are a lot of ways that you visualize with the result of the ability to turn on and off the piece of the kept and remove the help with selecting body parts that are inside two volumes that just plain hard to do, but they might want to make a copy of the water can be body used to be consumed. The feature could use the bowling subtract with the delete with the body with the water winds up the side of the water can. I would recommend that you take some of the time to play with the sample file and think of you may have to use the particular feature. Other nice use of the features include grading molds, breaking single solids into the manufacturer bodies. Here are some of the unique capabilities of the intersecting tool. Can add, subtract with the same feature. Can later completely change with the methods without needing to delete, recreate the feature. Can add for the planes to combine feature options. Can make bodies from empty space that are fully enclosed. Can consume bodies as not as you wish. Can consume bodies or not as you wish. Can output multiple bodies, solid bodies. Imagine combine several bodies when some of them are not touching at all. I'd like to thank Dwight Livingston for the Solidworks forum on the previous list of the intersecting capabilities. Our tutorial working with the best way to learn about the truth of the experimental recommending with the closely followed with the tutorial step 1, then you understand the concept involved, you can go back with the experiment. Alright, using cut with the strip of the following step of the game, and the experiment with the cut with the strip of the feature, create with the new part of the draw rectangular top plane, extrude in the center of the origin by 4 by 6 inches, 4 inch dimension, vertical direction, extrude the rectangle, mid plane by 2 inches, set the strip of the toolbar, loft the strip of the select 1 4-inch edge of the loft profile, select with the 4-inch edge for the diagonal with the first one, this is shown figure 1319, extend started ends constrained with both the ends of the direction during gear vector setting, so with the plane with the middle of the long direction, each of the space of the part with the shown with the right plane used, click OK with the accept the feature shown figure 3219. Layouting a solid for soft is very solid edges. From the menu, choose the insert the cut with the strip of the select with the strip with the fly out with the feature menu with the toggle the arrow with the directions to the top of the cutoff with the arrow with the points to the side of the cutoff. Using offset surface the following step of the game, someone experience the offset for the command, open a card part called offset with the solid part with the dominant material, the right click with the curved surface, curved face with the part with select with the tendency in the menu, with the face selected with the surface of the toolbar with the offset with the surface of the outside with the party by 600 of the inch, while the surface of the outside and the outside of the transparency preview appears. If you don't see with the transparency preview, toggle with the flips offset with the direction arrow button, click the OK to accept the feature of the where satisfied, look with the surface by the fold at the top of the feature manager of the tree, expand with the folder with the display pane F8, change transparency is shown figure 1320. This is the time you can see with the part underneath the surface without mistaking the surface with the actual part. 3220 shows the display pane with the changing transparencies. Tip, in a common practice, the change with the strip of the color with something contrary of the part called with the usually the color, like yellow, would suggest the temporary status of the construction. Some of the others, you have to take the steps of the template color for the strip of the types of the choosing tools option, document properties, colors. Select sketch 2 to select extrude boss base from the feature for the toolbar with the do not make with the extrude strip of the extrude solid with the start with the end condition, the up to the body with the activate the body sections and blocks. Select the offset strip of the body with the strip of the body's unfolded with the result shown figure 3221. If practically preferable, select the strip of the surface of the body rather than feature list with the graphic window, but in this case, the one strip of the body will make the selection from the feature list. Likely to select the feature with it's okay with the situation, but it's not in all situations. Make the selection with the graphic window of the selection likely to be interpreted as fact, as it best exposed for the most possible to making selection between, because the Solidworks may interpret your selection literally. In this case, you're probably better idea with the up to body with the end condition, and then up to surface because the goal is really to use surface of the body and feature to convert lettering into so it sits below the strip of the rather than above the strip that you can make with a few simple changes with the offset of the feature for the flip of the direction, offset of the strip of the inside of the solid rather than the outside of the solid. You can see that unless the solid is either transparent or wireframe mode, leave the extrude with the create with the extrude the text. For this is no way to change the extrude with the cut into the text. Into this text context, recreate the extrude the cut, the U of the from and the form settings at the top of the property manager window. Setting results are shown figure 3222. Another way to accomplish this is you the move of the face tool, select with the face of the layer, then move with the 120 thousandths of an inch and into the solid. Using fill for the blend. Sometimes fillers do not meet the needs. Blends such as shown with the black frame example. The smoother can be blended in just as anything. However, the technique is not exactly straightforward. Follow these steps of the game. Familiar with the technique. Open the part called Blend Solid part with the download. Chapter 32 of the box. Select all of the features with the delete. Face 1 shell with the suppress them. Top plane draw square 2 inches side of the center of the origin. You split any of the file with the sketch tool bar 2 with the tool sketch tool. Split any from the menu. Divide each line with the rectangle into 3 pieces, which 2 outer pieces of each line with a 6/10 of an inch. Use an equal selection relation. Sketch should be fully defined, just be finished for the arrangement shown in figure 3223. The done because the edge of the tube need to be broken into the section with all lines split. Note that the split line tool insert curve. The split line is to be split when the faces all of the tube. 3223 says split line and needs to split tubes. Use delete face, delete end of the 4 tube, the option of the delete needs the default option of the delete and pass first of the solid to surface body. Use sketch and split and ease to trim out the center section of the tube, keeping the outer section and leave the 4 surface body. Divide each tube at the edge of the 4 segments which have been trimmed and shown figure 3224. Initiate the loss shift of each of the select with the nearest edge segments for the adjacent of the tube with the loft preview choice for the light blue handle for the straighten out of the deselect with the reselect with the open one of the edges at approximately the same location with the other edge selected. Expand the end condition panel to select the set each for the edge of the curvature setting with the managed of the end tangent length option if you want, but keep in mind with this may make the part as asymmetrical as you show with the boundary surface of each of the places the loft each of this function is too similar enough to create a loss for the way around the part likely is linking all the tubes. Figure 3225 show the part of the three holes already complete with the last one in progress. Profile loft the surface selected plane surface of each of the select with the open end of each of the tube with the faces selected and completed in step 4. Note all features allow you to operate multiple bodies. Loft plane surface of the feature that does not the feature fillet draft will restrict you from creating features that are associated with one body at a time. 9. Start an insert between the shift to select all bodies, shift the bodies, fold the select with the first body, shift the select with the last body. When you click OK with the body, except with the feature for note if the number of the surface bodies changes to 1. So the bodies and wave is much faster, the larger number of the body, but then selecting the 1 at the time of the graphics window. Notice that the open edges of the surface bodies are shown by a different curve at this point, but there are 2 open edges around the holes intersection of the tube. Right click any of the open edges to select open loop with the initiate fill surface chain with the edge setting option with the tangent. Make sure they apply to all edges of the option. Select the merge result option, but leave the try to form solid option. Unselect the model at this point, showing figure 3226, along with the property manager setting of the type of the situation, which of the fill surface really meant in fact with the technique is created specifically and taking advantage of fill surface capabilities. Creating fill surfaces. Click OK, accept the feature to start with another fill surface feature for the throwing part over to use the same selection and for the pack with the same setting in the first fill. However, this one is when you try to form the solid option. Click OK with the selection section with the complete last feature to apply the shell feature that is selecting the flat ends of the tube and shelling with a 1/10 of an inch. Final state with the modeling is shown figure 3227. Bottom line, surface functions have a wide range of use other than complex shapes by thinking of the models in the term surface feature rightly, where a slightly different approach becoming the comfortable with the terminology. Similarity difference between solids and surface first step toward embracing surfacing tools for everyday work. You can think of the surface being reference geometry, standalone faces that you can use to complete various tasks. Master it. Sketch a rectangle, extrude it, and surface the enclosed one with the open side of the planer. Surface it together 2 surface bodies next to the one. Use the thickening tool, thickening the surface with a hollow box, down with the chain with the count with the surface bodies folded with the solid bodies to and folder, save it the part. Master open the part, save with the previous exercise, save as to make a copy of the new name. Delete the thickening feature. Use the fill feature, close the opposite side of the box. Use the option to fill the feature with the part of the single surface bodies to make it solid. Master open the part. Use the previous exercise. Use the save as to save it as the new name. Use the move copy bodies command with the make of the copy of the solid bodies. Move the copy one side. It does not touch original. Use delete face to delete one face for the new body. Notice the solid body changes to the surface body. Use the solid surface. Again, close up the missing face of the knit into signal surface body with the thickening to make the solid body again. Finally, use the solid loft feature of the joint between the 2 faces of the solid bodies that are closest to one another merge resolve so there is a single body in the part. Chapter 33, Employing Master Model Techniques.